In this lecture, we're going to examine some of the steps involved in the initial phases of the research process. What we will specifically examine is how we construct a research study, and oftentimes researchers will ask, where do I start? And we'll touch on some of those issues here in this lecture. We will further explore the research question, factors involved with the literature search. Very important to the research process is developing the hypothesis. Once we've developed the hypothesis, we actually now have to take the next step to test the hypothesis, and that is done by actually conducting the study. And once we carry out the study, the final step is to evaluate the results of the study and derive conclusions directly from the results that were observed. And so in terms of where to start with developing the research study, this usually starts with the identification of some problem that exists within a particular field of study or a problem within the social structure within the area that people reside. Oftentimes, the research project is initiated through personal and professional interest, and it always begins with the gathering of information. And at this stage, the researcher should cast a very wide net in gathering up information from whatever sources possible at the very beginning. So an example of problem identification can be obtained from a news source. In this particular example, the news story is highlighting issues related to social media and how it affects an individual's sense of body image. Another source of potential interest comes from an introductory course in psychology, for example. And so using a course textbook to identify topics is often a very good source for different areas to potentially study. And so to get further detail on the research process and the final stage of the research process in terms of the research product that is generated, one needs to go no further than the Department of Psychology at the University of Guelph. So in navigating to the Department of Psychology page, one would just click on the directory and look for all psychology faculty, and then what you would see as you scroll down the screen are a list of the full-time professors and their specific, or rather general, areas of study. One example of a professor is Professor Mark Fenske in the Department of Psychology at the University of Guelph. So by selecting one of the professors, what you will see is a profile of the individual here, where you would read a little bit about their research and teaching interests, a little bit about their biographical information, and then clicking on the next tab is typically a statement of their research activities and publications. Most of the professors will have a link to either their research or lab website, and more importantly, when starting to gather information to develop a research question or a project, Google Scholar is a very important link, because this will link to the actual PDF copies of the papers, in this case published by Professor Fenske, and the other professors in the department will have a similar set of links on their individual profiles. So once the research idea or a potential area has been identified, then using the resources at the University of Guelph becomes very important. So this link here through the library system will provide different databases that can be used to look up specific topics in journals scholarly books, so on and so forth. And so these are just three commonly used databases through which students can and researchers can identify literature specific to their topic. One database that is very widely used, although I will focus on PsycInfo in a moment, is PubMed. It's an American database that is used worldwide that is excellent in terms of conducting searches for research articles. The APA PsycNet database, available through the University of Guelph library system, opens up search options where the researcher can type in different search terms, combine different search terms. Usually all years are selected unless the researcher is seeking a specific author or a specific journal within a fixed time period, and there are different filters that can also be applied in more advanced searches. So once the research question or the topic of interest is refined, then the researcher will step through a number of thought processes to start to bring to shape that research question. One very important step is introspection, where the researcher will essentially reflect upon the information that has been gathered up to this point. And so through self-observation and reflection, the researcher will oftentimes instinctively ask, what would I do to address a particular social or scientific problem from a research perspective? A very important aspect of conducting quality research is finding exceptions to the rule. And this is considering alternative possibilities to previous findings, or alternative possibilities, more importantly, to widely held assumptions. And those assumptions could be widely held within a segment of society as whole, or within a particular scientific discipline. And so an important aspect to the research process and the scientific method is to continually question the outcome of studies and largely held assumptions. A matter of degree refers to measuring a concept. And so once a general area of interest has been identified, concepts need to be developed. But once those concepts are developed, they have to be observed from a research perspective. And so coming up with a way to develop a valid and reliable way to measure a concept becomes critical to the research process. One such example is personality. Society at large often makes the assumption that people are categorized in two distinctive personality types, referred to as type A and type B. But is there a better approach to identify an individual's personality and how that personality shapes individual behavior? There is a better approach that we will detail a little bit later on, and that is simply referred to as the Big Five personality traits. So once the concepts have been identified, in this particular case there's one concept referred to as personality, it must be operationalized to the very specific research project. What that means is taking a basic definition of personality and to redefine it in context of how the research question is going to be investigated. And so we'll discuss the operationalization of concepts in the research process a little bit later, and this ends the first part of our Unit 2 lecture.